Welcome, everybody. The big takeaways from this chapter on personality psychopathology are these. This is one of my favorite chapters. This is fascinating. Everybody knows somebody that has the personality features that are talked about in these extreme versions called personality disorders. So let's go. For this chapter, please be sure to read, first of all, those sample cases that are in your SU textbook that accompany each disorder. Now, these sample cases are really excellent, brief descriptions of what it would feel like to be in the room with these types of patients. Really kind of brings them to life, so to speak. So you want to read those little sample cases that are in the textbook associated with each of these conditions. So first big takeaway from this chapter. Again, it's essential that you remind yourself about the continuum between normal and abnormal human experience. That certainly applies to this chapter on personality disorders. Remember the difference between normal expression of these personality characteristics, the dependent, the antisocial, the narcissist, the paranoid. The difference between normal expression of these personality characteristics and the extreme expression, like when someone has a personality disorder, that's that continuum between normal and abnormal, like we've seen many times already this semester. We recognize these thoughts, feelings, and characteristics, even sometimes as our own, or certainly in people that we know in some circumstances and in some contexts. So this is a chapter where you may say, I think I've met somebody like this. I certainly have met lots of people that have personality characteristics. They may not have the disorder, but it's very common to find mild forms of these same personality characteristics in everyday life in people that we know. The person who is narcissistic, who's kind of always drawing attention to themselves, look at me, or dressing in a way that draws attention to themselves. They do their hair in a certain way. The narcissist. The one who is manipulative, who always seems to be getting other people to do things or think certain things. The person who's very emotional or kind of overreacts to situations. The drama queen, who overreacts to everything. These are all personality features, characteristics in people that we know. Taken to an extreme, it becomes the disorder. Always remember the disorder exists only in the extreme personality characteristics. That is, a person who's extremely paranoid or extremely malevolent or extremely avoidant. That is more like approaching a disorder. In the disorder, these characteristics, again, are of greater intensity and truly central to the individual's personality. We all know this person. For example, everyone knows the paranoid personality disordered person is paranoid. We know they're paranoid. We talk about it. We remark on it. We all know this is a consistent part of who the paranoid person is. When they're not around, we may refer to them as paranoid, maybe even make jokes. So remember that the difference between normal and abnormal, it must truly be central to their personality. The difference between normal and abnormal, the extreme, consistent expression of these characteristics is what we're looking for in the disorder. The second big takeaway in this chapter, we pay special attention, you noticed, to the borderline and the antisocial personality disorder, because these two are deeply troubled individuals who represent strong characteristics that overlap with several of the other personality disorders as well, and have some unique characteristics of their own, of course. The borderline personality disorder, for example, with her instability in self-image and therefore unstable emotions, those emotional swings from anger to sadness, happiness to sadness, also possesses characteristics of the histrionic, the drama queen, the narcissist, and certainly elements of the paranoid personality disorder. All of that is in the borderline personality disordered person as well. The antisocial personality disorder, with his lack of conscience, doesn't seem to have a conscience, things don't bother him, doesn't feel guilt. With his sense of entitlement, also possesses characteristics of the narcissist, and often the paranoid as well. Because antisocial people can be also extremely intelligent, very planful, very careful, they may also possess a high attention to detail and demand of themselves perfectionism, much like the obsessive-compulsive personality disordered person. So again, antisocial personality disorder, there's a lot of overlap with other personality characteristics that you see there. So pay special attention to those two, the borderline and the antisocial personality disorders. They're both fascinating and quite troubling people to be around. And lastly, the last big takeaway here is about borderline personality disorder. The cutting behavior that you read about in this chapter and in the notes and in the PowerPoints, the cutting behavior of the borderline personality disorder is perhaps one of the most troubling parts of this entire chapter. Understand that she cuts in order to regulate emotions, in order to control or release emotions. She cuts to feel better. She feels better after this cutting behavior and the bleeding behavior. And the rationale is that the pain at the surface of the skin draws attention away from the emotional pain within during these stressful experiences in a person's life. The cutting is coping. The cutting is a coping mechanism that the borderline personality disorder patient has learned for overwhelming upset or overwhelming emotional pain. If they could have developed a better coping mechanism, they would have. They cannot, and that's why they have a disorder. And so they cut, sadly. So in summary, the big takeaways from this chapter, really interesting chapter on personality disorders, one of my favorites. Number one, it's essential that you remind yourself that normal and abnormal are on the same continuum of human experience. It is common to find mild forms of these same personality components in everyday life, these same characteristics in everyday life in people that we know. The disorder comes in the extreme personality characteristics that's consistently a part of who a person is. Second big takeaway, we pay special attention to the borderline and antisocial personality disorders because they're deeply troubled but complex individuals. They also represent strong characteristics of several of the other personality disorders, as well as being unique to themselves. And lastly, the cutting behavior of the borderline personality disorder. It's puzzling, but their cutting is a coping behavior. The cutting is a coping mechanism for dealing with overwhelming upset or emotional pain. She feels better. She feels better after cutting because the pain at the surface of the skin draws her attention from the emotional pain within. Those are the big takeaways from this really interesting chapter on personality psychopathology. Thanks.